The morning sun was just beginning to warm the streets of Ouagadougou when Mariam, a middle-aged fruit seller, began arranging baskets of ripe mangoes and roasted peanuts at her stall. She had lived through years of uncertainty, her husband killed in an insurgent attack 5 years ago, her children growing up in a country where danger often arrived without warning. For months, whispers had drifted through the market about well-dressed foreigners frequenting a nearby tea shop, speaking in languages most locals didn't understand. Mariam had noticed them but paid little attention. Life in Ouagadougou had its share of mysteries. That Tuesday, however, the mystery came to her doorstep. At exactly 8:00 a.m., the hum of engines filled the air. Military trucks rolled past, their tires crunching over the dusty road. Soldiers stepped down with purposeful strides, their boots thudding in unison. Mariam's eyes followed them as they moved toward the unassuming telecommunications building across from her stall. Within minutes, uniformed men emerged, carrying boxes, hard drives, folders, sealed equipment. This was not routine inspection. It was a sweep, precise and uncompromising. Later, she would learn that this was the opening move of a nationwide crackdown ordered by Ibrahim Traoré, the leader determined to remove Israeli-linked intelligence fronts from Burkina Faso. As Mariam watched the trucks drive away, she felt a strange blend of apprehension and relief. It reminded her of stories she once heard about the civil rights movement in America, when ordinary people found the courage to stand against powerful systems. Sometimes, God works not through whispers but through thunder, reminding his people to stand guard over what he has given them. And now, the question lingered in her mind. Why had Burkina Faso chosen this moment to act by the time the clock struck 8:15? The streets of Ouagadougou were buzzing. Word spread quickly that the military wasn't just in the capital. Similar operations were underway across the nation. 7 companies, all tied to Israeli intelligence networks, according to the government, were being shut down at the same time. Soldiers didn't shout or threaten. They moved with the quiet precision of a plan long in the making. Computers were unplugged, documents sealed in evidence bags, encrypted devices carefully tagged. Outside the market, Mariam watched 2 trucks drive off, each stacked with crates marked classified. She felt the same strange sense of finality as when a heavy storm closes in and the first drops hit the earth. Ibrahim Traoré, whose critics often underestimated his resolve, had been monitoring these companies for months. On the surface, they looked like ordinary telecommunications or cybersecurity firms, offering contracts, tech solutions, and even economic aid projects, but beneath that facade, intelligence operations were gathering detailed information about Africa's natural resources, political movements, and migration flows, the kind of data that could shape foreign control for decades. For the people of Burkina Faso, the realization was sobering. These weren't just abstract political games. They touched the soil beneath their feet. If someone else knew where the gold veins ran deep or which village leaders could be pressured, they could decide the country's fate without firing a shot. It reminded Mariam of something her late husband once told her: the person who holds the map to your home controls the road you walk. Watching the soldiers secure evidence, she felt as if the map to her nation was finally being pulled back into Burkinabe hands. This wasn't an impulsive move. Traoré's decision was the result of months of intelligence gathering and quiet coordination within the government. It echoed historic turning points in African liberation struggles, moments when leaders risked isolation to reclaim sovereignty. In the United States, such defiance might be compared to a state refusing to bow to federal overreach during moments of constitutional crisis, except here, the stakes were a continent's future. By midday, the operations were complete. No grand announcements, no preemptive warnings, just swift, decisive action. And yet, everyone knew this was more than a domestic cleanup. It was a message, not only to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, but to every foreign power operating quietly across Africa. Africa's blind spot had just opened its eyes. The question now was whether this was simply a counterintelligence sweep or the beginning of a doctrine that could redraw the balance of power across the continent. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Ibrahim Traoré stood before a modest group of reporters and cameras. There was no pounding fist, no raised voice, only a calm steadiness that carried further than any shouted threat. "Africa is not your blind spot anymore," it declared. Each word measured, the silence afterward, as heavy as the words themselves. In that moment, Mariam was home, sitting with her children in their small living room. The radio on the shelf crackled as the broadcast carried Traoré's voice across the airwaves. Her eldest son, barely 17, leaned forward as if he could see the man speaking. "Mama," he asked, "does this mean we are free?" Mariam paused before answering. "It means someone is trying to make sure we will be." The images spoke louder than official statements. Burkina Faso was done tolerating hidden hands. The ripple effect was almost immediate. Mali announced it was halting all imports of Israeli military technology. Guinea froze its joint cybersecurity projects. Niger went further, launching a full investigation into foreign-backed infrastructure contracts. In just 3 days, 3 neighboring countries had aligned themselves with Burkina Faso's stance. For Mariam, the sight of young people gathering in the streets with hand-painted banners reading "Africa is not for sale" stirred a deep memory. She recalled her father describing the days of Upper Volta's independence in 1960, the pride, the uncertainty, the sense of finally steering one's own ship. Back then, the foreign flags lowered. Today, it was the hidden wires being cut. Internationally, reactions were telling. The United States issued a vague statement about dialogue and restraint, offering no direct criticism. France stayed silent. The European Union avoided comment altogether. Israel, on the other hand, called an emergency meeting. Its advisors scrambling. One was overheard telling Prime Minister Netanyahu, "He's building a wall against us." But as the momentum built, so did the questions. Would these bold moves invite retaliation? And how would they reshape daily life for the people who had cheered them on? In the days that followed, the mood in Ouagadougou was a mix of celebration and quiet calculation. At the market, Mariam's customers debated what would come next. Some feared losing foreign aid or access to technology. Others believed the short-term pain was worth the long-term gain. For Mariam, the conversation wasn't abstract. She remembered the years when sacks of rice arrived, stamped with foreign flags, gift from the contents keeping her family alive, but also reminding her, with every meal, of dependency. She had felt both gratitude and a quiet shame. Now, with Traoré's crackdown, she wondered if her children might grow up without that shadow over their plates. Traoré's doctrine was announced formally: 3 pillars: complete transparency for any foreign operation in Africa, 0 tolerance for espionage or hidden agendas, and regional cooperation to share intelligence and monitor outside actors. On paper, it was bold. In practice, it demanded political will from leaders who had often chosen the comfort of foreign backing over the uncertainty of self-reliance. In the countryside, village leaders began holding community meetings to discuss the news. Some spoke about the possibility of higher food prices or delays in infrastructure projects. Others focused on the pride of charting their own course. A farmer from the outskirts of Kaya was quoted saying, "Better to walk on our own road, even if it's rough, than ride in a car someone else controls." Staying out of it risked being seen as complicit in foreign interference. For Mariam, the choice seemed simpler. One evening, as the call to prayer echoed over Ouagadougou, she told her children, "If God gives us land, it is not for sale, not for gold, not for promises, not for anything." The question was whether the people were ready to bear it. Beyond Africa's borders, the tremors from Traoré's actions traveled fast. In Washington, officials issued a carefully worded statement urging dialogue and restraint, avoiding any direct condemnation or endorsement. Behind closed doors, Analysts debated whether Burkina Faso's move signaled a regional trend that could challenge decades of Western influence in Africa. In Europe, silence spoke volumes. France, historically intertwined with West Africa's politics, refrained from comment, perhaps calculating the risks of alienating a movement. Gaining popular legitimacy, the European Union followed suit, preferring to watch rather than intervene. Israel's reaction was sharper. Prime Minister Netanyahu convened his Security Council in an emergency session. Advisors warned that if the so-called Troy Doctrine spread, Israel's lucrative defense and surveillance contracts across the continent could unravel. Billions in revenue and valuable intelligence pipelines were at stake. One senior aide reportedly said, "If this becomes the African standard, we will be shut out." American interests in Africa extend far beyond aid, including counterterrorism partnerships, trade routes, and resource access. Publicly siding with Israel risked pushing African nations toward alternative alliances, possibly with powers like China or Russia. Remaining neutral, however, risked emboldening a shift that could diminish U.S. leverage. Merriam, of course, didn't think in those geopolitical terms, but she understood the weight of global attention. At the market one afternoon, she overheard two traders discussing news reports from America. One man said, "They're watching us now." The other replied, "Let them watch. We are still here." The question now was whether Africa's stand would follow that arc or be crushed before it could take root. From the crowded markets of Ouagadougou to the diplomatic halls of Addis Ababa, the shockwaves of Traore's actions have carried a clear message: Africa is watching. And Africa is ready to act by exposing and dismantling Israeli-linked intelligence networks. He has not only defended Burkina Faso's sovereignty, but offered a blueprint for an Africa that defines its own future. But the road ahead is steep. Powerful nations, from Israel to the United States, will not easily surrender their influence. Economic pressure, withheld aid, and political isolation are all possible tools they could use. Within Africa itself, leaders who have long benefited from foreign partnerships may resist joining this movement, preferring the comfort of predictable alliances to the uncertainty of independence. Yet there is something in the air that feels different, a momentum that is less about one man and more about a shared awakening. For Merriam, it is not about treaties or trade balances. It is about the hope that her children will inherit a land unshackled from hidden deals and foreign dictates. One evening, as she closed her stall and looked toward the horizon where the sun dipped low, Merriam thought of the stories her father used to tell of times when people believed they could shape their own destiny, no matter the odds. And she wondered, was she living in one of those times now? History tells us that every movement begins with a choice to remain silent or to speak, to accept the world as it is, or to change it. Traore has made his choice. The people of Burkina Faso are making theirs. If God grants a people their land, their dignity, and their voice, it is not so, they may sell them for comfort, but so they may guard them. Even when the cost is high, the question now is not whether the Troy Doctrine can stand, but whether Africa will stand with it.